Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode we're doing It Came From The Network. The topic of this It Came From The Network, WWE Old School, or actually WWF Old School, marked as Season 6, Episode 2. This is a show from Madison Square Garden that took place on August 29th, 1977. And the reason we selected this show, about a week and a half, actually about 2 weeks ago now, I had put out on the community page, anyone that wanted to make a suggestion to make one. My good friend Bucky749, the American Samurai, he said to do something with Superstar Billy Graham. He didn't give an exact show, so it did take a little while to get to this. I did find this show. There is a Superstar Billy Graham match. He is the WWF champion at the time, so that's why I picked this one. With all that being said, if you've not seen any of my shows before, we grade everything on a 1 to 5 scale. 1 is the worst, 5 is the best. And for all of you that are subscribers or new people coming to the show, there is going to be some information at the end. There's going to be channel news, personal news that we're going to talk about at the end of the video. For those that are just here for the review, we're going to put that up front. We start off the show with an interview with Vince McMahon. Yes, that Vince McMahon. Interviewing the High Chief Peter Mayavia, who's making his WWF debut in the Garden. I don't know if it was officially his debut or that's just what they said. They could have debuted him in like Danbury, Massachusetts or somewhere other than that, and no one would know at the time. There wasn't an internet, so unless you just happened to be in both of those cities, you would not have known. Kind of interesting here seeing the High Chief Peter Mayavia. I haven't seen a ton of his work. There's not a lot of Polynesian Pro that's on tape. I've seen this actual match before in a different place, and I've seen some other matches that he's had before, but very little of him. You could definitely see where the charisma for The Rock comes from. You could see where the foundation of that is. We start off, he goes right into a match. It's Peter Mayavia versus Stan the Man Stasiak, who is, at the time, a former WWF champion, so this is a big debut for him. Stan Stasiak, at the time, I think there was maybe 5 or 6 champions. Yeah, Buddy Rogers, Bruno, Ivan Koloff, Pedro, Stan Stasiak, and Billy Graham, Superstar. So there were 6 champions at the time, so he was only one of 6 people at this time to have held that championship. So it was still a very, very big deal. It's still a big deal today. Even though I would say he's one of the lesser champions in the history of the belt, it's still a big deal for someone to debut like this. I did forget to mention, they mention HBO on this. I didn't have, and I wouldn't have remembered anyway, because at this point I was 6 months old. They mentioned that this was on HBO, so I don't know if this was something at the time that the MSG shows were being aired on the HBO. Anyone that's old enough to remember, hit me up, let me know if that's actually a fact. We didn't actually get HBO in my area. I remember it was about 84-ish that we got HBO and Cablevision in my area. And we may have had it before. My family might just not have personally had it. But it seemed like everybody on my block got cable around the same time. It was one of those things like, hey, we got cable. And you and your friends would talk about it. But anyway, I digress. This was I would say this is my favorite match of the card. It was a lot faster paced than I remembered. Mayavia looks amazing here. Stasiak, who I've not liked much of his work that I've watched, but he looked good here as a foil for Mayavia. Peter Mayavia does pick up the win here by countout. I'm going to give this a 3. I think it is my favorite match of the card. Now going from that, we go into a tag team match for the tag team championships, a 2 out of 3 falls match. We get Tony Garea and Larry Zbyszko. This is pre the heel turn on Bruno, going up against George the Animal Steele and Baron Mikhail Sakuna. Steele at this point was still a heel, and he hadn't went into what would be the primal 80s version of George the Animal Steele, where it was almost like he was lobotomized. He still had some crazy mannerisms here, but it felt like he was more of a real person. Not that he didn't feel like a real person in the 80s. They just made it seem like, and I want to dance around this because I don't want to say this inappropriately. he kind of felt like he may have been on the spectrum with the way that they had him on the 80s. Like, that's how they portrayed him, like he may have had some mental problems. And it was a little bit different portrayal here, more of just an evil, heelish character that was historically crazy. And I'm using crazy and mental issues as a different thing. I'm talking crazy like Manson, Marilyn Manson I guess too, but Charles Manson type crazy, or Ted Bundy type crazy, as opposed to someone that has some mental disorders. This was a very weird match. There was a lot of, it just never felt like it got off the ground. Gurria and Zbyszko win 2 falls straight, so weird to see in a 2 out of falls match at 2-0. Especially with as big as Baron Mikhail, Sakuna, and George Animal Steele. I know they're historically in the 70s, especially in the Madison Square Garden in New York market, they were very big heels. It just felt like this match never really got off the ground. I'm going to give this one a 2. Going from that, we get another interview in the ring. It's Vince again interviewing superstar Billy Graham, which he does one of his interviews. You've probably actually seen this interview before. I know I've seen this again without seeing this show. There's a couple clips that I've seen from this that have been played. It may have been on the Billy Graham DVD. I'm not 100% sure. It's been a decade since I've watched that DVD. This leads us right into a match where it's superstar Billy Graham defending against Ivan Putsky. Kind of interesting, and I'll talk about this at the end when I talk of the overview of this. A little bit how we're still in the era of ethnic champions or ethnic heroes. What's a hero? Is that like a new brand of Cheerios? But anyway, I digress. This was actually another really good match. This is another match I had lowered expectations for. Putsky, and it may be clouded because most of my recollection of Putsky is later in his career and he's not as good as he was here. Superstar, I never really thought was a great in-ring worker. He was more of a great personality, which he's one of the greatest personalities of the 70s and probably of all time in WWE, WWF, WWF, whatever you want to call it. This was actually a really solid match. Superstar does get the win. And I did forget to mention, he did have the Grand Wizard, which I love seeing the Grand Wizard. There's not enough talk about how awesome of a manager the Grand Wizard was, how much he got out of so little. He wasn't Bobby the Brain Heenan. He wasn't Jimmy Hart in Memphis. He wasn't J.J. Dillon. He was a different kind of manager, but he made everything feel so important. And he was managing Superstar here. Superstar Billy Graham outsmarts Putsky in what is basically a very clean match, gets a win by countout. I'm going to give this one a 3. I thought it was pretty solid. Going from that, we get a very strange match for WWF. Verne Gagne versus Nikolai Volkov, who at the time was still being billed for Mongolia, which I believe is kind of weird because he was one of the Mongols earlier and under a different name. They eventually said he was from Russia and then Lithuania. This is a younger Nikolai. And again, this is much like Putsky. A lot of people remember him later in the mid to late 80s run in the rock and wrestling era, where he was still pretty good. This, again, much like the tag match, I don't think it ever came off. I don't know if it was maybe something where these guys weren't that familiar with each other. Verne, another wrestler who kind of, to me, and I understand his style, and I understand the AWA style, I understand the shooter style. He always was a little bit boring to me. Very interesting that during the match that Vince McMahon is so heavily talking up the AWA and Verne being a former AWA champion, Nick Bockwinkel defending the AWA title. He even mentions Harley Race here, which is something insane. Just to think 5 years later, 6 years later, when he takes over the company, I would doubt you would hear a mention of the AWA or the NWA for at least another decade after he took over. Verne does pick up the win here. A very slow-moving match, probably a lot less interesting than it sounds like on paper. I'm going to give this one a 2. Next up, we have the living legend Bruno Sammartino going up against Ken Patera in a Texas death match. And Ken Patera has Captain Lou Albano with him. This is when Lou was still a heel manager. There was a triumphant called the Three Wise Men in the WWF, Lou Albano, Fred Blassie, and the Grand Wizard, and basically all the heels had one of the three as their manager. The first thing that stood out is there was nothing really that made this a Texas Death Match. It didn't have the Texas Death Match rules. It didn't have death match rules. It didn't really have anything that you would think of as a death match historically. And I've seen death matches, Texas death matches from the 70s. Some of the stuff that the Funk Brothers, Terry and Dory, were involved in with the Texas Death stipulation was some wild stuff, some crazy stuff that they were doing back there. This felt more like just a little bit. There were a couple little pieces that were out of place, that were a little bit what you would call against the rules of the time. But other than that, it just didn't feel, even in comparison to a specialty match like that of the time frame, it didn't feel like it should be marked as a Texas Death Match. Obviously, I mean, it's Bruno. Bruno does pick up the win here. I'm going to give this one a 2. Then we go to the final match of the show. And if you're not familiar, the WWF or WWE, WWF in the 80s, they would do this a lot. The main event was actually in the middle of the card. Then there were a couple more interesting matches, and then there was a lesser match to end the show. We end the show with Chief J Strongbow going up against Mr. Fuji. Fuji has with him Toru Tanaka, because Tanaka and Fuji were a tag team. He's also got Classy Freddie Blassie with him as his manager, which is very cool seeing Mr. Fuji being managed by somebody else. Because again, growing up mostly in the 80s, most of what I've seen of Mr. Fuji is him being a manager. I do know he had a great run as a wrestler. This was a weird and interesting match again. It goes to a no contest when the match is ended by curfew. And I don't know if you know this or if you've heard this. You may have. If you're watching this video, chances are you've heard this before. But Madison Square Garden had a solid 11 o'clock cutoff back in the day where you were not going to run anything past 11 o'clock. And that is what I assume happened here. It hit 11 o'clock, they cut it. The match was over, time for everybody to go home. Because it felt like an incomplete match, and it really never, it was about 6 minutes or so, it never really felt like it got off of the ground again. I'm going to give that one a 1. Overall, a couple interesting things. I mentioned it a bit earlier. We're definitely in the era where your gimmick is your nationality or your ethnicity. Mayavia being Polynesian, Mikhail Sakuna obviously representing Moldavia, which is, they kind of had a Nazi tinge to it. Putsky being Polish power, Nikolai Volkov being Mongolian coming at saying this time. Bruno obviously had the Italian American, which is very interesting. Ken Patera as an Olympian, an American hero in the 70s as a heel, weird but good. Jay Strongbow with the Native American gimmick. Mr. Fuji obviously being Japanese. So we're definitely in the era where your gimmick was defined by what your nationality was, what your ethnicity is. Overall, I thought the show was a little bit lackluster. I'm not a huge fan of the WWF style in the 70s. There are some standout matches. There are some great matches of that era. There are some great wrestlers of that era. Some of the guys I liked the most of the 70s were here as Abisco, Tony Gurria. I love Tony Gurria's work in the decade. But for the most part, it doesn't compare. Like, if I watch something like from Memphis in the 70s or Mid-South in the 70s, that work, or even Florida in the 70s, that work seems to be better to me. To me, it just, for my personal liking, it was a more boring style. This is almost the same style that was being run in the AWA. I would much rather watch something like a world-class show from the same time period. All of that different area. Mid-South obviously had some great stuff going on at the time. Overall, I'm going to give the show a 2. A little bit less than middle of the road, I would say. Just a bit over bad, but nothing I would really care to write home about. With all that being said, I'm going to get into what I teased in the beginning of the show. We got some personal info and some channel info. First off, if you may have noticed, I put it on the community page all last week. I do live in Central Florida, and we were affected by Hurricane Ian. It came right over my community, right over my little town. I personally did not take much damage. I lost one piece of siding off of my house, which was as monstrous as that hurricane was, and as destructive as it was. I am very grateful for that. There are a lot of people that have lost way more. I was out of power for half of the week. That's why you didn't see shows. I had no power from Wednesday all the way to late Saturday. By that time, I was so tired and so worn out, and you could probably hear it in my voice a little bit still, that I didn't want to make up those videos just because I didn't have the energy to do so. It was a trying week. It could have been a lot worse. It was a lot worse for a lot of people very near to me, just about an hour and a half to the west of me. In the Fort Myers, Sanibel Island area, they got hit extremely badly. 30 minutes to the west of me, 20 minutes to the west of me, I have good friends that live in the Wauchula area, Hardy County area, that got affected pretty bad, where they lost bridges. There was a lot of flooding in that area. I personally, like I said, me and my family, we came out very well, which I'm very grateful for. All of my friends came out pretty good. I mean, one of my cousins lost the windshield on her car. It's terrible, but in the grand scheme of things, there are people that lost everything they had. So they're one thing, if you have it in your heart and you see the Red Cross or anything, make a donation. There's a lot of people hurting. I'm not hurting. I don't need the help, but there are others that are. That's the personal news. Channel news. This is so exciting, and this is all on you guys. About an hour before I recorded this show, I picked up my phone and I was looking, because I always like to check the notifications. I like to check any comments people have made to see where we're standing. We have reached a major milestone, at least in my opinion. I know there's a lot of channels that this is nothing to. They get this many viewers in a day. We crossed 1,000 viewers or subscribers. There's a lot of significance to that. First, it's an amazing number. To have 1,000 people that are willing to say, not only do I like your video, but I want to subscribe to your video, to your channel to see more, that is very humbling to me. I 100% appreciate that. Whether you watch 1 minute of my videos, or every video I've ever done, or you watch one every now and again, or you watch a certain episodes I do, if you watch a top 10s or this, or Walking in Memphis, or whatever I do. Anything I've done on YouTube is all because of you guys. It's so amazing that I made it there. The biggest reason is because that opens up my channel for monetization, which you are going to see commercials. As long as I get approved, you are going to see some commercials on the show. What that's going to do, that is going to help out the show immensely. I could get improvements. I could get better lighting. You guys may not see it, but it bothers the heck out of me. My lighting isn't what I want it to be. Like right now, I can see in the viewfinder, there's a lot of glare coming off my glasses. There's lighting that I could get that'll get rid of that. There's editing tools that I want to purchase that are quite pricey. They'll help me with my editing to make the edits better, to make the videos better. All in this is because of that, because you guys were able to get me there, I can apply for it. Now, I don't know that they haven't approved it yet. It's a process at the time of this recording, but it is something I'm extremely grateful for, and I wanted to mention it here at the end, because it's not me. I didn't create 1,000 accounts and subscribe to myself. That would probably take years. It's because of you guys, and I really appreciate that. You'll never understand how much I really do appreciate that. I would love ultimately one day for this to be my job, where I made videos every day, multiple times a day even, like a What Culture would, or Cultaholic, or any of those bigger wrestling YouTube channels. I would love to be at that point. Right now, I'm not, because I'm smaller, which I'm not mad at all about that. I appreciate every single one of you guys. It's amazing. Anybody that's liked it, subscribed, shared my videos, put a comment in there, it's helped me immensely. And that's what I want to get at. I just want to say thank you to all of you guys for helping me. I really do appreciate it. And the last thing, this is kind of personal, and it's a little bit of a downer, but I have to say it. I was contemplating Sunday on doing a specific video on it, but again, because of the hurricane, I just didn't have the energy to do so. We just lost a little bit ago, I believe it was last Friday. My days ran together. I do apologize if I have the day wrong. But we lost one of the absolute legends in professional wrestling in Antonio Enoki. Now, and I know I'm going off on an extreme tangent here, and the end of my video is longer than the video itself probably is going to be. Antonio Enoki, to me, is one of the most important wrestlers there's ever been in the world. First off, you can't measure the amount of success he had. There's no comparison in American wrestling. Now, some of you will understand this because there are a lot of you that watch Japanese wrestling and are familiar with it, but there's no one in America on the level that Enoki was. Enoki to Japanese wrestling would be the equivalent of he's higher than Hogan, higher than Austin, higher than The Rock. His star power would be like Babe Ruth, Michael Jordan, maybe Tom Brady. Tom Brady probably doesn't even get there. It'd be like if you had the combination of Brad Pitt and Michael Jordan and their star power, or The Rock and Michael Jordan. You'd have to combine them to get just how popular Enoki was to Japan and what he means to the sport. He's the inventor of New Japan Pro Wrestling, which to me is my absolute favorite wrestling promotion. I know right now it's a lot different than his plan, but it's a promotion that I've enjoyed ever since I first learned about it. His influence on both wrestling and MMA, and I'm going to make this short. I'm not going to ramble on for 30 minutes. I wish I could. I should have probably did a video. His influence on both the world of MMA and wrestling is so immense that I could spend 4 hours talking about it, and I wouldn't even scratch the surface. I just wanted to end this video saying thank you. First, all you guys, thank you for your support. Thank you for reaching out. And I also wanted to say thank you to Antonio Enoki. Your contributions, your involvement in pro wrestling has meant more to me personally, and probably millions of others all throughout the world, than you'll ever know. I just want to say thank you to the legend, Mr. Enoki-san. Godspeed, rest in peace. I hope nothing but greatness comes of your life. You were one of the greats of all time. And I just wanted to say thank you. With all that being said, if you made it to the end, let's smash that like button, share the video, subscribe, all that great stuff. If you made it all the way to the end, let's put something for Enoki in the comments. We'll either rest in peace, Mr. Enoki, thank you, Mr. Enoki, whatever you want to say to Antonio Enoki, put it down here in the comments. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and this was another episode of It Came From the Network.